Good afternoon. So I know I am in a precarious public speaking situation. I am all that stands between you and the break. So I will be brief. I have about 12 or 14. Actually, it says I have 0. I have no time. Thank you. Thank you. That was great. So I have about 15 minutes of stories I'm going to tell you about. Some of it's from my new book, but a lot of it has to do with public speaking and how that ties to a lot of the stuff I've heard talked about already today and at Web 2.0 Expo. So this book that I just wrote, I'm an author. I actually make a living as an author. I write books for a living, and I blog, and I tweet, and I do a lot of other things to support the book, but to support the books that I write. But one side effect of having books that are popular is that if you're fortunate enough to have a popular book, is people want you to come and talk about the book and talk about ideas from the book. And so since this is what I've been doing for the last 7 years, I do a lot of public speaking simply because I'm a writer. And so when I was thinking about what to write for my next book, I thought, wow, let's write a book about public speaking. And I can tell all the horror stories of things going wrong and all the disasters that have happened to me, and you can benefit from my mistakes. So the book is largely about all these things that I've learned. But what I wanted to start talking to you about today, I am going to talk about public speaking, but most of my work, the stuff I've studied for 15 years, has to do with creative thinking and invention and innovation. And I wrote a book in 2007 called The Myths of Innovation. It was a best-selling book. And that book is largely about, well, what's the history? What can we learn from all the things that we think happened? What were the actual stories that we can pull out of those events? What were in Da Vinci's actual journals and Edison's journals? And what were the true stories behind the myths that often end up in movies and in films? And how can we apply that to stuff that we do? So I know a lot about history and technology and invention and creative thinking. But one side effect of studying this stuff for so long and understanding that whole tree of history and lessons and tactics is that there's another path that's become apparent to me that's even more interesting, possibly more interesting. And that's the stuff that doesn't change, the stuff that's timeless, the stuff that's universal, the universal drives and needs and questions and problems that even though we have so much new technology that's great and fantastic, there are still these things that linger on that haven't changed. So the first story I wanted to tell you has to do with this building, the Jacob Javits Center. So 12 years ago, I was working at Microsoft. I worked on a product called Internet Explorer in the early 90s. I worked on version 1 through 5, and I was a project manager, kind of a sergeant-type guy on the development team. And there was Internet World. Internet World was the premier web development, internet latest happening kind of event. So I thought it'd be interesting to go back a little bit, since you guys are in the same place that Internet World took place, and do a little compare and contrast. So the first thing you should know whenever you're doing history like this is there's a way to do sort of technological carbon dating, is you look at the megahertz in the ads for the stuff at that time. So this is actually on the screens on your, they're not behind me, it's look over there, over there. This is an ad for Internet World from InfoWorld magazine, which was actually a printed magazine in 1997, no longer the case. Another interesting thing that you should know about from that time, just to let us know how far we've come. Back then in 97, most of America was dial-up. They were dial-up broadband, dial-up internet access users. So in the exhibition hall at Internet World, there was probably 30 or 35 startup companies that were focused on dial-up and getting around dial-up. Push technology was in part an idea for getting around dial-up. And the whole idea was, this is going to seem insane to you, but the whole idea was you could subscribe to websites and download content at night when the dial-up rates were cheaper. And then the next day, you could read the web. Bizarre to us today. Clearly, this is something that's changed. Clearly, our megahertz and our processors is much better. But, ooh, that was bad. Okay. One thing that definitely has not changed, though, one technology that is pretty much the same, is the one we're in right now. Lecturing. Public speaking. And I find that fascinating because if there's any community of people that's going to move on in terms of technology, do something new, it's going to be us. We would find a way to get over the inefficiencies of having to be in the same physical place with all these people at the same time. It's expensive. The logistics are complicated. But this is still what we do. 12 years ago, there were keynotes in this very room. And I suspect 12 years from now, at the Web 12.0 conference or whatever it would be called, there'll be lectures again. And I find this fascinating. That means that any invention or new idea, however great or amazing it is, if you're the person who makes that thing, you will end up talking about it. And people will be convinced to follow or use that thing, in part based on your ability to speak, which is one of the oldest kinds of technologies that we have. There's others that you should be aware of. They go back in time. Now, writing, I mentioned speaking already. Writing, which is sort of a poo-pooed kind of thing, and as an author, I am effectively a professional writer. Writing gets discounted a great deal because it's the underlying communication medium in blogging, in web pages, in email, in Twitter, in text messaging, and whatever else comes next will mostly be writing. And if you pay attention, a lot of people are still really bad at written communication. So we depend on this technology that we overlook now because thousands of years have gone by and everyone knows how to read and write, but it was an invention at a certain point. Then the third technology we overlook, the social media technology we overlook, is beer and booths. Beer and booths. These are social lubrication technologies that have been around forever. The idea of a booth, putting up a sign that says what you work on, and people come up to you and talk about that stuff, and you give them free tchotchkes and T-shirts, or maybe in ancient times they gave them togas or something. You give away free stuff because it allows people to find easier paths to communicate and talk and get what you want, which is connection. You come to events like this to connect with new ideas, or with new people about new ideas, or new ideas about new people, and on it goes. That's really why you're here. And all this stuff is set up to afford that. Speaking and writing, drinking, and the booths is all set up to afford that stuff. So my first major point for you has to do with storytelling. That on all of these mediums, really what we're doing is storytelling. And any technology is available. You can use any technology to tell a good story. The problem is technologies the storytelling skill is not something a technology can give you. You have to put that in yourself. So one story I want to tell you, which is a personal story, goes back to 1997. At Internet World, I was working on Internet Explorer 4, and we were here to talk about that. And on that day, we were here, Internet Explorer had like 22% market share, which was not very good. So instead of sitting in the booth and being passive, we felt like, me and another program manager said, we should go out into the exhibition hall. Let's go talk to all the people, because the people come to us, they're already going to be interested. We should go out there. And this was a crazy idea. I was just a kid. I was not a sales professional or anything. I was a manager of software development. So we just did this fluky thing. We grabbed a stack of CDs, and we walked out there. And I discovered that something amazing happened in these conversations. Because we would go up and say, hey, I work for Microsoft. They go, oh. And I'd say, I work in Internet Explorer. They go, oh. And then I'd say, hey, let me show you what I worked on. And they go, you worked on this? And I'd say, yeah. And then they'd start complaining. And I go, well, let me explain. And when I got to the point where they realized that I was not a salesperson, I was not a marketing person, I was not a for-hire evangelist, but I was actually in the room when these decisions were made, and I could give them more insight into why certain things were done, and they felt like they were actually talking to the real person, that the look on their face changed. And there was something authentic about that moment. Now, I can't take credit for the market share growth of Internet Explorer. My conversations probably did a lot less than some of the other things that Microsoft may have done around that time. But it changed me because I realized there's you can tell a good, authentic, honest, moving story through any medium if you're willing to go and do it. The technology of social media, the technology of this event, it sets you up, but there's always a step that you have to take yourself. And I don't think the failures, we have all this stuff we complain about technologically, that we point the finger at technology as to why we feel isolated or why we're frustrated. But I think there's always things that technology cannot do for us. And the more powerful technology gets, the more obvious I think those things are. So another situation, another story I want to tell you is a story that many of you probably experience. And that's a story that goes like this. You have a manager or an executive, someone important to you, a client, maybe even your spouse, and you carefully craft an email to make certain points and tell a certain story, and you send it to them, but they have this disease, this neurological dysfunction, where they seem only capable of reading the first sentence of your email, and they skip the rest, but pretend like they read it, and have all these assumptions they put in their response, and they reply all, and then someone else replies, and they're basing it on the assumptions, and then you have to do like the SWAT team dive into the email thread to try to recover sanity, and it becomes this huge mess of miscommunication. And as technologists, we look at that mess and go, wow, this is like all this communication data. And the solution is to archive it and come with a taxonomy for it and index it. And, oh, we need a search engine for it and tag clouds for it. And we go, hey, it's still kind of messed up. But we believe these are technological problems when I think it's just a basic level of miscommunication. When people are talking past each other in any medium, that's dysfunction. If instead of listening, you're just waiting for the next moment to speak, that's dysfunction. And no technology can save you from that. It's not a technological problem. It's a human problem, and it's a problem of storytelling. So the diagnosis is this is email interruptus, and many people suffer from this. There's no technology that will ever prevent this from happening. And so when I look at Twitter, I see similar patterns that I don't blame Twitter for. It's not the technology's fault. When people retweet stuff that was retweeted to them that they haven't read and they retweeted on, I think that's a really strange thing to do. It's really an odd thing to do, because what does that mean? How can that be an authentic act to pass on and distribute something that you don't even know what it is? And it's a common habit because we feel like volume is good. Pass on more volume. Maybe someone else will find value in this, but I feel the opposite way. I don't need more random information. I want people to be authentic and to give me stuff that they actually believe has value. And if they haven't read the thing, or they skimmed it, or they're assuming what it is, that can't possibly be authentic. There's not a whole lot of integrity in that kind of use of any media, of any story, of any data or any information, to just pass it on. And so Cool Hand Luke is one of my favorite films. It's a great film. There's a line from that film that gets repeated a lot. What we have here is a failure to communicate. And in the movie, it's the boss guy, the prison warden guy, and he says this to Luke right before he has one of his goons beat the crap out of him. And it's kind of a metaphorical problem here that his idea of communication is punishment. And you will be punished if you don't do what I say. That's not communication. That's abuse. That's a misconstruction of what communication actually is supposed to be. So the last story I want to tell you has to do with you, really. So you're here at this event because there are things you want to learn. There's things you want to know. There are connections you want to make. There's ideas you want to discover. And the technologies that are provided to us here in this format can only get you so far. Just like I said before, storytelling is up to us. We have to go and decide that we're going to take that last step and humanize it and add your own story to things. And I'm convinced that one of the reasons why I'm here in front of you is because of this quote, which I read years ago while I was still working at Microsoft, that we like to focus on technology breakthroughs. But Penn Jillette, who from Penn and Teller, had this to say, which is, the problem isn't the technology breakthroughs. It's that we're not keeping up. The human side is not keeping up. We've lost our ability to connect through some of these mediums. We fail to take responsibility for what we have to do to make those stories come through. And it's never something that technology is going to come around and do for us. So a trick, a little tactic that you can use, because we're going into the break. We have a minute or two to go. We're almost there. You're going into the break. Instead of allowing yourself to fall into these patterns, think about stories. When you go up to the booth, don't allow them to give you the whole scripted routine that they've done a million times. Say, what's your best story? What's the best story you've heard of someone using this thing for value? Or tell them your story. Hey, I have this problem I'm trying to solve. Can your technology solve that for me? That's a story. That's a much better way to actually humanize connections and get the things that you came here to get. So the last thing I want to say, so this is the book. It just came out. It's actually brand new. It came out like 2 or 3 days ago. And if you like this way of thinking about speaking and communication, that storytelling is really the core way that we get what we want, that we communicate and connect, then I hope that you'll check out the book. And in about a half hour at the O'Reilly booth at 4 o'clock, there's this big confab of O'Reilly authors, and your favorite O'Reilly author will probably be there. And we'll be talking about all kinds of stuff and having a few, using the drinking technology I mentioned before. We'll be in the booth. That's the second one. I'll be speaking there as the third. We'll be having a whole great conversation, and I hope you'll come down and tell me some of your best stories. Thank you for listening. Thank you.